Everyone good? Yeah. All right, good. Welcome. I don't know if any of you guys have been here into this space before, but thank you to Barclays for hosting us. Hopefully everyone can hear me at the back. Rob, you got me? We're audio good. All right. I have been throwing this presentation around in my mind for probably the last 18 months or so in some way, shape or form, because I've been trying to piece together what I think is a very big emerging opportunity for us as innovators, right? I think that we live in I believe quite exciting and quite optimistic times, right? Like there's a lot to deal with in the macro sense and also inside the companies that we are working with, particularly as innovation teams, right? These cycles make our lives harder or more easy depending on, what we've got happening around us, what's happening in the business context or whatever. But I think that there is a huge opportunity that sits in front of the innovation capabilities across organizations. And I often think of Wazoku as the lab for our customers, right? We're a software company. We've been building software now for well over a decade, but we're also an entrepreneurial business run by a founder who doesn't like to stand still. That's me. That is constantly exploring, experimenting, and thinking about how do we push the boundaries towards the jagged edge of disruption and change, but also understand that there's quite a lot of really quite basic stuff that we still need to fix at the core of our organizations as well. Wrestling with what really is that innovation value chain that we are working with, and which bits of it should Wazoku try and do from a technology perspective, and which bits of it should we try and do from a non-technology perspective, and which bits shouldn't we do, right? But still try and build the ecosystem around. My observations of having lived and breathed in the broad innovation space for over a decade now is it doesn't help itself, right? Like there are lots and lots of reasons behind all of that, but in many ways, it's still quite an analog set of processes that we run in our organizations. It's still quite a set of analog professional services that come and advise us in the ways that we do things. It's still quite heavily dependent on the PowerPoint presentation, the Excel spreadsheet, and a myriad of other tools that exist all around it. And so for a little while now, I've been trying to figure out, again, which bits of those should we play in and which bits of it shouldn't we? And what does that mean and what does it call itself? And to a degree, going through this very emotional journey, even with the word innovation, right? I kind of don't like it. But it's sort of a little bit of a false friend, frenemy, necessary evil, or something else. And so over the course of the last 12 months or so, this idea of total innovation has been baking through my mind and really trying to gather some level of manifestation and understanding. I'll pretend in the future, in whatever form this gets narrated and written down in, that there was a broad strategy around all the things that we've done. I think somewhere in there was. But over the last 5 years, we've bought 5 companies, right? We've been piecing the bits of those companies together into some semblance of what this total innovation vision has become. I think they were done arse about face to a degree, some of these things, because the ideas had to bake through in my mind. But also having spent a while building the company and then a little while kind of working on the company, but not as much in the company, and then recently really folding myself back into the company again, that journey has led to the manifestation of lots of the things that I want us to talk about, but also the things we've been building as an organization. I think there's a big nemesis that challenges us, and I think that over the course of the last, where are we now, like a couple of years, is it, since the OpenAI thing kind of manifested itself into the world, and to some degree, particularly probably for people in the broad innovation space, kind of had that moment or that wow moment or that what is this thing moment, right? And we've gone through a very, very radical or rapid set of learnings, explorations, experiments, etc. But what it has caused us, I think, to understand, or certainly from my perspective, is perhaps the thing that sits at the heart of the big innovation at scale challenge for us as organizations, which I'm going to talk about as the black box. So I'm going to start a little bit with a story. There's lots of great networks out there. In the entrepreneurial space, there's loads and loads of them. I think some of them add value, some of them are just talking shops, et cetera, et cetera. There's one that I've been sort of on the edges of and then more recently found myself more involved in, which is a group called the Founders Forum that I got to attend at the event of this year, quite recently over the summer. In that collection of people in a room, there are a mix of really good disruptive startups, like the next sort of unicorns, the existing current unicorns, and large organizations that are interested in the things those businesses can do, whether they are friend or foe, whether they see them as threat and future competitor or potential collaborator or enabler in some way, shape, or form. And there's a couple of stories I want to share around that kind of relate to the black box in some way, shape, or form. One is I'm sat in that room, and over the course of a day, I get to meet a few people. I get to understand what they're doing. I listen to some great keynotes. I understand bits of what's happening, probably what will happen over the next hour with me talking. And it's fascinating. And you scribble loads of stuff down, and you take loads of notes, and you go back to the office a little bit invigorated with what you've learned. But you only touch the surface of what was in that room, right? There was so much opportunity in that room. There were so many great people. One of the people that I did meet on that day was the CEO of a company who I'd kind of known peripherally for a while. We actually share a board member, so the chairman of my board was the chairman of their board, is now a non-exec director. And the work that they do in the renewable energy space is really relevant to a lot of the work that we do in the renewable energy space. And as Wazoku, we've been ecosystem building, and one of those ecosystems is in the space of offshore wind. These guys are really at the forefront, at that jagged edge of some of the innovation that's happening around offshore wind. And we've been out looking for interesting disruptive startups. Yet the connection was never made between that, despite the fact we share a board member, despite the fact that I kind of knew them, although they'd rebranded. And so when I first met him, I didn't put one and one together and come up with two. And I didn't really understand the problem that they solved as an organization until I could have that conversation, which will lead, I think, to quite a lot of opportunity for them and for us and for our clients as we go forward, which is great. However, so what, right? It's like it took me to go to an event that I may or may not have chosen to go to. Actually, judge me or not, missed a family funeral to go to that event that day because I felt it was the right thing to do. As I said, it may or may not have been. But it was super valuable, right? It took me to do that, which may or may not have happened. It took me to have that conversation. It took me to understand the organizational context that we were sat in and that they were sat in. It then took me to process that and bring that back and do something with it, to give it to somebody else in the organization who would understand what to do with that and then do something. And actually, it's been a few weeks now, and I have no idea whether we've done anything with that or not. So how do we, first of all, try and fix that process that shouldn't take 8 years, which was the first time that I encountered this business, or 9 months, which is how long we've had this offshore wind program running, or even that whole process of serendipity. And we take that through, and that happens millions and millions of times across the organizations that we work in every single day, right? And that's the sort of early manifestation of what I'm going to talk about from this black box problem, which is I believe that we are dealing with a very, very, very big nemesis, a multi-billion-dollar nemesis of this black box. I want to talk about it and talk about how I think together we can start to unpack it and start to try and unleash some of the value, not just from a today perspective, but from a more scalable innovation at scale perspective going forward, which is a change from the Wazoku business that you will all probably have known from us today as well. Back to me pushing the organization to think differently, be different, and start to explore things differently with our customers. That doesn't mean that we are moving away from the products and services that we've got. It means that we're trying to extend beyond them to drive accelerated value and put more in the power of your hands to do the amazing things that we need to be able to do as innovators. So let's take a look at what's inside the box, right? What do I think is inside there? I'm going to start with another story. And I didn't really know the roots of this story too well until I read an article recently that a friend of ours published on their blog. So we've been partnered with a a thought leader, former professional sports person called Aidan McCullen, who runs a podcast called The Innovation Show. Great show. He's had it long before we've been involved in it, and we decided this year to co-author a series with him around a book that we co-authored called The Corporate Explorer, all about the people inside large organizations that actually get done in the innovation space. And he wrote on one of the chapters, so every chapter of the book we've run a podcast episode on, and we'll happily share the links afterwards. I would encourage you to listen. I think it's great content because it's very practical, hands-on guidance stuff from people that are at the grassroots doing it, not people writing theory and books about, academic research around the topic of innovation. And he was talking about the concept of the black swan, which we'll probably know from the book, the narrative around these kind of rare events that have big shifts in the world. The actual origins, I believe, of this, if I take Aidan's word on it, go way, way back to before the 16th, 17th century, and the European belief that all swans were white. But occasionally you'd see a black one, right? And so from a European perspective, the story and the myth of the black swan was written in history. Until in the mid-17th century, the Dutch explorers got on their boats and went out and explored the world and landed in Oceania and discovered that in that part of the world, there's black swans. And that is more of the indigenous population than the white swan. And so why do I tell that story and why do I think about it? Is because I think that this is part of the black box challenge, is that we can only see what we see. Our judgments are clouded by the truths that we hold to be true, whatever they might be in our organizations, right? I can't get this done because of X. I don't have the budget to achieve this. I don't have the knowledge to achieve this. I can't see the answers to this. The answer does not exist. It is too hard, blah, 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 blah. Most of the time, I believe the answer is just outside of plain sight, and that there are tools and ways and means that we can start to help to unlock those at scale for us within our organizations. And we're doing some of this, right? People might sit there thinking, cool, Simon, this is all easy to say, and we're doing bits of it. We're starting to bring in people and mine our data and think about that more horizontal grade of pulling the data together and starting to use AI and machine learning and other things to do it. But the innovation lens is quite a specific and quite a special lens, right? The art of what is the demand side problem space that we are trying to address and getting that piece right. Anyone knows this business will know we bang on ad infinitum about the concept of challenge-driven innovation, and spending the time on the upfront problem statement will save you a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of disappointment than just racing to the solution space. But getting that right is not easy. How do we focus on the right things? How do we make sure that the assumptions that we are working to, all swans are white except the few that are not, are actually valid assumptions, that the problem spaces that we're working on are actually the right problem spaces? And there's many, many, many of those examples where we may think that to be true, but it is not true. There's a very classic example in COVID in the US, where there was a firm belief that the failure to deploy free COVID tests in the world was because the entire US healthcare system is structured to make it thus that you must pay for healthcare. And therefore, millions and millions of free tests were sat in piles and able to be deployed into the world. The reality is that every single IT system in every single clinic had no mechanism by which to put $0.00 into a sale. It just didn't exist. And you couldn't put 1 cent because you'd have an accounting error of millions and millions and millions. And so they couldn't be deployed, not because the system was against them, not because of anything else, but because, and the answer was laying just outside of plain sight. In this case, ask the bloody clinics why, right? Rather than make the assumptions that it's against you. And you could fix it with a simple code change, right? Simple line code change, push deploy, fix the problem, free tests are now deployed, and people's lives can be saved. And so these answers exist just outside of plain sight. And so what's inside the black box is all of these different things with that innovation lens applied to it of problem, solution, fit. How do we get good at understanding the problem spaces, the opportunity spaces, if we want to take a more positive lens on those things that we're working on, and how do we start to bring all of that information together from a total innovation perspective to walk through those, to help us to accelerate decision making and understand the connected collective piece of the work that we are doing as organizations. I'm not going to talk through every point on this slide. You guys will receive the slides afterwards. You can ask me questions. You can agree or disagree in any way you would like, and I will happily take feedback from anyone on all of it. So we started to build this, right? As I said, I've been sitting and baking this concept and this understanding in my own head for a while, which is somewhat unusual for a business that likes to rush out experiments quite quickly and see what happens, right? This one I felt was quite important. It's going to sit at the heart of the Wazoku business for the next while, right? And so let's take our time. We introduced it to the business at our global kickoff in April this year, which was after several months of hard work and thinking. Then I started to pitch it out to people that I trust and I understand. We do a lot of work with some of the big universities around the world, the Harvards, the Stanfords, the Oxfords and Cambridges, the King's College Londons, and everyone else. We've got researchers in there that are fascinated by the type of data that we have, particularly on the crowd side, right? We have thousands and thousands of different open challenges, millions and millions of different people around the world engaging in really interesting solutions, from little ideas to brand new IP. And there's a whole suite of just really interested research that can be done around those different areas. It's never been as much interest in the internal piece as when I started talking about this black box innovation problem. And suddenly I got a lot more interest from a whole variety of different people that really started to understand that perhaps at the top of the organization, there is a missing piece of enterprise tech that really can help to unlock this problem in a problem solution fit aspect of the innovation data sets that we're working with, which, to be clear, I don't necessarily think is a different data set than the myriad of data that you have. I think the lens you need to apply to it is very specific, needs to be trained in a very, very specific way, from a skill set of your organization to the skill set of a synthetic capability in terms of the machine, to help you to start to see around the corners that you can't see around, to spot the black swans, to spot the opportunities, to place the right bets as you go forward. So I actually spoke to someone about this, and then a few days later, this article appeared in Forbes magazine talking about what I'd spoken about. I didn't pitch it. I never asked anyone to write the article, but it just popped up with a reference to me saying, like, do we think this is a real problem or not? Drawing parallels to the early days of the Salesforce revolution and, moving from marketing leads sitting in people's, localized black books and Palm Pilots or whatever the hell they were in the late 90s and early 2000s, all the way through the evolution of that into a full customer lifecycle capability that, love it or loathe it, is a nature of how life works today. I don't think that the whole total innovation piece is just that, though, right? Like, we're not trying to just bring all this data together. We're trying to make it actionable. We're trying to help make better decisions to drive quicker impact at scale out into the marketplace. So I think this is a much more profoundly important piece of technology than a CRM system, but it's analogous to it in many ways. At the heart and soul of all of that, and I don't really know whether this image is going to stand the test of time or not, but it doesn't really matter, are God knows how many different black boxes of information that exist around our organizations to help us do all of the things that we do in there, the presentation tools, the R&D tools, the innovation management tools, the business transformation tools, the trends market landscape tools, the surveys that we constantly get, customer intel insights coming in, all of which has a use in the function that runs it, but a much greater use for the organizational knowledge bank connected to the problem solution piece, right, from an innovation perspective as well. So how do we start to try and pull all of that together to unleash what I think is the hidden superpower inside our organizations? That isn't just your data, by the way. That is the data that exists inside your organizations. I was at a demo day recently. I freaking hate demo days. But I was sat there as an observer this time with the Unilever innovation team, partly to give feedback on both sides of the process. And the problem is you've got a company on one side talking about the needs that they've got, and a bunch of startups on the other side talking about the solutions that they've got. And they're like two entirely different languages talking to each other. At the end of the day, everyone walks away having basically learned nothing. So how do we find a better way of translating on this side what we've got and translating on this side, the demand side and the supply side, to try and help bring them together so they're more like a plug and a plug socket that actually should fit together, right? And like whatever that analogy might be. To make matters worse, there isn't just one black box, as I've just shown you here. there's loads of the bloody things, right? And there's even more, and we can keep going, and we can keep going. And the proliferation of SaaS software has made this worse, right? We bought all of these different tools that will espouse stories of connectivity, but in reality, who's going to do that work? Does it really connect? How do we really bring these things together? And it isn't just about bringing data together, as I've said, it's about starting to understand that data with an innovation lens to do anything meaningful with it in any way, shape, or form. I have no idea how I'm doing for time, by the way. So I will keep waving until Mariana shouts at me. The part of the challenge here is that these black boxes don't just exist now. They exist across the domains of time. So there is information from times gone by that we want to use today. There's information that I got from this event I gave you in where I met this company Beam that will have value into the organization and into the ecosystem into the future. There are things that happen in this box here that might add value into this box down here today, tomorrow, or sometime into the future. There are things that will have happened in this box here that might feed into that might fit into hit over here. And so how do we start to draw those connections through time and also through horizons? If you start to visage this not just as a collection of lots of boxes on a screen, but through some of the common innovation language that we might use. Let's think about this in terms of time and horizons, right? Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3 type thinking, that we've got projects that we're working on in our organization. Or maybe another way to look at it is between the capabilities that we have as a business, the products, the services that we're working on, and the markets that we serve with those products and services, and start to break those black boxes down, not just into their component parts, but into the bits that we call this innovation portfolio as we go forward. And think about those not just as products, markets, and capabilities, but as the markets we already serve with the products we already have. Again, there may be value in this box up here, which is brand new or embryonic capabilities in brand new or embryonic markets that we're working on. And suddenly our black boxes start to connect in a very different way from us from an organizational perspective, but the data's still locked. It's locked wherever in these different places. And so how do we start to unlock this and bring it together? And I think there's a problem in here of language as well, right? So like this is what it might look like, but we might call these things something else. Continuous improvement in the bottom left-hand corner, traditional markets, existing capabilities are a part of the innovation narrative that we need to work to and we need to serve. Incremental innovation, existing capabilities we might have in markets, or existing capabilities we don't have that currently exist somewhere else that maybe can help us to expand our reach into the markets that we already serve. Etc., right? So in all of these, there's little black boxes. Across all of these, there's little black boxes. And that limits our ability to innovate, not just in the box itself, but connectedly across them. And then as organizations, we structure these things into silos so that they're not only data siloed, they're now functionally siloed as well. And we just make it so difficult for ourselves to do everything. And so this ultimate piece connecting between explore and exploit, I don't think is a distinct part of the way that we need to carve out of the business and do somewhere disconnected, particularly from a data set perspective. We need to pull it all together. And so that's our journey really, right? From all of these little black boxes that don't mean much, all the way through to how do we start to pull this into an innovation framework, an innovation portfolio, an innovation mix, and from a data set, a decision-making framework that can help us to do something impactful and something useful as an organization. And so that's where total innovation, from my perspective, starts to come alive. This is an evolving beast, as I said. It's a thing that's been stewing in my brain. I woke up at 4 o'clock this morning and almost entirely amended the way I wanted to present this today, and I've probably done that differently on stage now than I intended to then as well, because the research and the experience and the frustration that comes behind all of this isn't fully formed still in terms of its manifestation into the world, but my passion and belief for where we're trying to get to with it, underpinned by the fact the pace of change is so quick in all of this, right? There's things that we wanted to do for the last 5 years that we couldn't do because the technology wasn't really ready. The market wasn't really ready either, right? And I'm not sure that all of the market is fully ready right now, but the appetite and the interest is there because the LLM revolution has forced some of that narrative upon us. And we certainly cannot do the things that we want to do as organizations with the LLM revolution if we don't start to think about connected data, if we don't start to understand how that data connects into the various complex systems that we run as organizations, we can't really figure out what the hell that data is if we haven't got a connected collective intelligence capability that sits behind it, because even if we gather it today, it'll be out of date within 3.5 seconds and very, very out of date by the end of the day. To ultimately not forget the fact that it's all about driving value. It isn't just about building another knowledge bank, another knowledge management capability. Like, forget that. That is not the world that we live in. We're innovation people, right? We're driving change and value. It's about accelerating discovery to accelerating value as we go forward. Hence, it is a missing part of the innovation stack. I was pointing at that, but it's also there, in our organizations. We've written a lot of content on this, and for the time that I have today, because I also want to leave a bit of space for some questions if I can, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through these, and I think the stories that I've given and the some of the narrative that I've talked to will come through in all of this, but instead I just want to talk a little bit about what it is that we are then going to do from an organizational perspective, from a products and capabilities perspective, thinking perhaps a little bit about what does Wazoku look like on this grid, and where are we trying to help organizations to pull this together, but where are we as a business mixing our innovation portfolio as well, right? So there's kind of a dance between both of those things at the moment. Sorry for flicking around so much. So we'll share these slides out. Again, there's a whole bunch of white papery reading, and I would welcome feedback on this, right? Like, again, I've sat and personally written, I think, all the content that you will read, because it's been stuck up here and I had to get it out. So I couldn't give it to anybody else. I had to sit and just write. I hope it makes sense. I hope it resonates. I hope that it starts to evolve this conversation. But if it doesn't, tell me, right? Because I'm building a whole business around this. And as I said, I think we're your lab, but also you're my market validation, right? You're the people that tell me whether we're moving in the right direction. And obviously we've been out and had some conversations and started to test all of these things. And this is what the business is starting to look like from a solution perspective. So again, we're going to dig into this, and the workshops and the sessions that Mariana spoke about earlier will give you an ability to lift the lid on some of the different aspects of this, particularly in here, and here for now, and a little bit of academy. But just to talk through this a little bit. This is the world of Wazoku that most of you will know quite well, right? Innovation management, how do we do all the things from idea, problem capture, curation, collaboration, blah, 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 with an augmentation of crowd alongside it if you need to bring the world in as your lab, as your discovery engine, to unleash this kind of global superpower from an innovation and data gathering perspective. Upstream of that are the signals that help us to know whether we are doing the right things. That isn't just from a value chain perspective of my opportunity spaces, like where should I innovate? Because in every little bit of that quadrant, or those 9 boxes that I spoke about, you constantly need those signals, right? You need to know in any given area what the market intelligence is telling you, and do you need to change course? Do you need to accelerate course? Do you need to, bring in a different supplier? Yada, 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 right? There's lots and lots of things that can drive every little bit of your organizational decision-making in all of those different areas. The reason that I think this is key is that data set, because it's connected always through the processes that you're doing, needs to be part of the data set in here as well. It can't live in standalone tools. It can't live in PowerPoints. It can't live in strategy documents on its own. It can live there, but it can't live there exclusively. It needs to be something that the company, the business, the organization can access, not one person, not 5 people, but the business that is trying to drive meaningful change across one of those 9 boxes or more inside your organization. And so how do we start to bring that in as a capability, both as a software capability and a non-software enabled capability? Because I don't think that technology can fix all these ills. I'm not up here espousing just buy SaaS and it can fix everything, and buy my SaaS because that's one solution, not 50 others. Like, it is a complicated journey that we'll need to go on, and I recognize there is professional services that are needed in here as well. The other piece of this is that ecosystem, right? That ecosystem of suppliers, partners, the startup example that I gave you earlier. If that lives anywhere inside an organization at the moment, it lives in one of 2 places: a procurement database, i.e. it's dead, right? The only people that know about it are procurement people, or it lives in some system like a Salesforce-y type system or whatever else it might be, which has got some level of use, but wouldn't it be a damn sight better to be able to go in and really understand at the point in time that you are doing any of these things, whether you've done any work with any of those organizations, universities, startups, whether anybody had met them. So Simon met the CEO at an event. What does Simon think about it? Et cetera, et cetera. To be able to find ways to automate the intelligence that's coming around those. They just did a new product release. And all this kind of exists, but it's disconnected again, right? It's in one to God knows how many different little black boxes that only a certain number of people have got access to licenses to, that when they run their report, only a certain number of people will ever read and see, and is basically useless, right? It may tick a box at that point in time, but as I said, these things exist across time and space. And so at the whole heart of all of this is this kind of purple box in the middle, right? The bit that we're really kind of doubling down on is, how do I make it easier, therefore, once we start to pull all this data together, and this is a mix of your data and not your data, right? As in data that we might be able to bring to the table because we've got this massive marketplace of information, skills and capabilities that exist through the crowd. And this isn't just about startups, it can be about talent and skills and unlocking those people who don't all need to be hired by you, don't all need to be brought in as consultants from insert blue chip consultancy firm, because there are lots of brilliant people out there who can come and do brilliant work for you to accelerate the discovery and the work that we're needing to do, vetted against a set of processes that don't add risk, they just reduce cost, reduce complexity, and accelerate the things that we're doing. And they do that by helping to track them better. But at the heart of all of it are those areas, right? How do I get better data to track and understand and analyze what's happening? How do I get a better view of where my spread is across my organization? Because I haven't met a single person yet that understands exactly what that mix is. No portfolio management can give you that in reality at this point in time, I believe at least, because no one is measuring innovation at that 9-box level, right? And if you truly believe that the data at box, whatever it is up there, can really add value at box down there, and we know that to be true, then you've got to connect all of those different boxes, all those different dots together from an organizational perspective. And alongside those things, so an AI lens, I'm almost feel like that's just the thing you have to say today. We're putting a lot of energy into this, right? But it's about training the AI in these very specific nuances of problem solution fit, right? Helping to really understand what is the problem space, what is the solution space. And if you think about that, go back to the example I talked about at the Founders Forum event earlier. It's really bloody hard. Or think about a trade fair that you walk around. It's like you look at all these banners, like, what does this company do, right? What problem do they really solve? I don't know, like something up there to do with innovation. Like nobody knows. Like we market in hyperbole and riddles. Our websites are in hyperbole and riddles. Like it's almost impossible. So how do I get under the skin from a data perspective to understand what problems these businesses really solve? Right? Well, how can they really help you from an organizational perspective? I'm not saying that's easy, but I can do it in a number of ways because I run lots and lots and lots of crowd-based challenges to understand what type of things people react to. You guys have data yourselves that we can understand the different things that we've done. We can track those things in a management tool that lets you understand the type of projects and work that you've done. I can validate that against other public and non-public available data, and I can start to understand what the companies are really talking about in this big volume of data to start to match in something that hopefully makes a bit more sense than that, right? Whatever that version is, I love that, but whatever that version of that is, the thing that's there, that underpins itself with a set of skills, right? And so Mariana and the team have been working really hard. Right now it's quite foundational, but to bring more of a digital capability so that when you want to pick up little bits of skills, little bite-sized bits of learning, whatever it might be. I wrote a AI for innovation prompt training on the train on the way in this morning, at least as a bare bones thing, to start to bring bits of that learning in. So you go, look, we want to learn a bit more from that. And again, you can probably go and get that from lots and lots of different places. I don't really care, right, where you go get it from. I just think what you need to do is tie it in to here. To know, is it making any bloody difference? Did it help the person to do those things better? Did it drive any extra value from you as an organization? Not tick an L&D box and everyone moves on and no one has a bloody clue what happened afterwards. And then layers in the right level of professional services so that we're not just pumping out, good words and good vision and everything else, but actually helping to drive more of the outcomes as you go forward. So from a Wazoku perspective, that plays out in a number of different ways. I'm going to give you a little bit of an example of the AI piece, just because I think this is quite a nice example of data that we had at Wazoku, right? So a few years ago, I bought this business, Innocentive. Innocentive is what we call Wazoku Crowd now. It came with an abundance of data, all kinds of different data, challenges that had been run with millions of submissions that had come back and millions of people that had participated over the years. And it was a basket case of just data, all in PDFs and Excel format and like all kinds of just unstructured content. And so we ran a project and we've got a data science capability and we're training this AI and we're doing all these things to say, what do we know, right? What is the data that we have in our database? So how do I start to cluster it? And if you go on the Wazoku Crowd website now, you'll see this and you can play around with it, right? You can dig in, but these are all areas at a very top level. It's nice marketing that we've done work in on a crowd perspective, right? There's many, many, many more. There's a big long tail of other areas, but it starts to bring to life something that I couldn't see and we couldn't see as an organization. We knew it in our heart somewhere, but we couldn't see it and I couldn't communicate it. That takes you right the way back to the example here that I can start to drill into now. Now, that's a nice little example. It was a massive project. It was a pain in the arse to do, right? But we've now built the clustering capabilities, built the training, and we can start to do more with this as we go forward. And this is the type of work that we need to be doing to start to unlock the value that lies within the unstructured data sets within our organizations from an innovation perspective, right? Just one little example. There's many, many, many versions of this that I can happily talk about. We then spent time thinking about the process, right? And I don't think anybody necessarily needs another innovation process, but I thought there was a gap in our thinking on this, not necessarily yours. I'm sure you guys all have great innovation processes, but that help to really categorize what are the different tools and the different capabilities that exist in this trying to do, right? And I think there's a little bit more work to do on this because it now really needs to be applied at a practical problem solution or problem space and functional space level, which is complicated because you all call your jobs different things and your functions different things and your pain points different things and they're sectorally driven and then they're mired in corporate speak that make it even harder. But somewhere in there's a set of really consistent sort of pain point areas that I think we can speak to quite nicely, but we'll work with you. I'm not imposing a new framework or a new process or a new structure in anybody. I'm just merely providing the corners from a Wazoku perspective, to say, I think if we can start to get a connected collective intelligence aligned to a connected data set around these kind of areas, that we will accelerate value in our organizations. That some of these are a mix of technology-enabled and non-technology-enabled capabilities that the business can help drive and deliver. And again, we can talk about these. I'm not going to do it now. I'm not going to spend any time digging into this. I'm just going to start landing the suggestion that Wazoku can do more. And that if you can piece all of these things together, that you start to unlock this black box, this multi-billion pound, dollar, euro, whatever currency opportunity that I think exists across our organizations and across our organizational ecosystems that we're working in today.